Thank you so much for joining us on a Wednesday evening. I really appreciate it. My name is Dr. Mandi White-Ajmani. I am the owner and founder of Small Brooklyn Psychology. We are a group practice in Brooklyn, obviously. Our offices are usually at Industry City, and we are still making good use of those, but certainly a lot less these days than usual. Um, but our practice is 6 clinicians. 3 of us do neuropsychological assessment. 3 of us do therapy with a cognitive behavioral foundation. And we work with people of all ages. So people from toddlers all the way up through older adults. And we can really see and give you lots of information on a very wide range of issues. We have partnered with Premier Pediatrics, who I know a lot of you came to us because you saw their marketing for this webinar. Premier is a pediatric practice in Manhattan and Brooklyn and the Rockaways. And we wanted to work together to help bring both physical health and mental health information to as many people as we could reach. So thank you so much for joining us. This is actually going to be a monthly webinar series, and this is our first one. We will be meeting about the middle of the month, and we'll send out more information about that when the time comes. But we're doing a whole series of topics on things like Sam's talk tonight is going to be on managing anxiety. We're going to talk later on about next month about how to manage difficult behaviors in your kids. In January, we're talking about mental health 101 and how to recognize problems and in kids and adults and get further help when you need to. Later on down the line, we're going to be talking about school problems, how to recognize them, how to address them. We'll talk about what a neuropsychological assessment is and why you might want one, what it can do for you. We'll talk about depression and mood stabilization and getting help. And more to come after that too. And we're certainly open to ideas if you have them. So thanks again to Premier for co-hosting this. And so tonight's talk is managing anxiety during COVID-19 and beyond. Obviously, there are a lot of reasons to be anxious right now. I'm anxious. Sam, I think, is probably a little anxious too sometimes. But the nice thing is that the therapy modality that we use is extremely uh, amenable to treating anxiety in a very effective and efficient way. And so we wanted to bring some of those teachings to you all as well. So Dr. Sam Jeannite is going to lead this talk. He is a clinical psychologist in our practice. He has his degree from Pace University. He's had training in a lot of different facilities, including hospitals and residential treatment facilities, therapeutic schools. Most recently, he was at the League School in Crown Heights. But just as of this month, he is now all ours. So we're very excited about that. Sam works with people of all ages, but definitely has a great way with kids and adolescents, has a really nice way of connecting to people who might not even think that they want to be in therapy, and yet they somehow find themselves talking to Sam, even when they weren't planning on it. So Sam is very warm and engaging, but also very competent and effective. And so he's going to be sharing his information here about how to manage anxiety. If at any time you have a question so Sam's going to talk for about 30-35 minutes. We're going to leave about 15 to 20 minutes at the end for question and answers. So if you have a question, please send it in the chat box. I will get those. And then at the end, I will moderate questions for Sam to answer. So go for it, Sam.
Hi, thank you, Mandi. Hi, everybody. I hope you are well, and I'm glad that you're able to join us for this talk. I'm hoping that I could be mildly interesting to you today. So if you have any questions, please feel free to put it in the chat box, and then I could, as best as I can, answer those questions. And if I don't have that answer, I'll be more than happy to do some research and get right back to you. So today we're going to be talking about managing anxiety during COVID-19 and beyond. 2020 has been crazy. COVID-19 sucks, and 2020, the whole thing has just been nuts. So I'm pretty sure a lot of us could agree on that fact. Ambiguity, uncertainty, and confusion has resulted in feelings of anxiety and frustration. And it's okay to be anxious. You're not the only one. You'd be surprised. There are people who are going around acting as if everything's okay, no problem, no issue. But in actuality, people are anxious, people are scared. There's a lot of uncertainty, like in terms of work, in terms of, COVID-19, the fact that, the amount of cases are rising again. Those are things to be anxious about. So, when you hear or when you're feeling that anxiety, just know that there are other people who are feeling the same thing as you are. So we're going to talk about anxiety, and my goal is today to kind of hopefully share as much information as I possibly can in a really concise and succinct way. So anxiety is not necessarily a bad thing. We have anxiety and stress through everyday life, right? You go, if you're going to, present something today, yes, you need to have a little bit of anxiety to kind of keep you a little bit vigilant, keep you on your toes, make sure that you're not, just kind of talking about whatever. So that's really important. Or if you're going to do something important like sing or do other different activities, having a little bit of anxiety kind of helps you, kind of focuses you a little bit. But it gets to be a bad thing when it just becomes overwhelming, when it becomes too much. So like most things, too much or too little can have a negative effect. For me, it's chocolate cake, right? But for other people, it could be other things. If you have too much of it, it may not be that great for you. Anxiety can be as informative as it is detrimental for a person. What that does, similar to pain, if you hurt your toe and oh, my toe is hurt. 2 days later, my toe is still hurt. I need to go see a doctor. Similar to that, anxiety can be informative. If you are anxious about something and you're like, oh, I'm anxious, and typically I'm not anxious about this, and you go to sleep, you wake up, you're still anxious, it could be telling you something. It could be your mind or your body or whatever telling you something is happening, and for you to be attuned to that and to be aware of that is and can be helpful to you. um, so the key is how you handle your anxiety. So one thing that I like to use, especially when talking about anxiety, and I find it very useful, is the generalized anxiety disorder. It's a measure that they've used in different psychological studies and different organizations, and the whole idea is to kind of get a baseline of from the last 2 weeks on your level of anxiety. So if you take a moment to just take a look at this scale, you could see and you could kind of give yourself a quick test as to whether or not you're feeling particularly anxious or not. So, for example, number one is, are you feeling nervous, anxious, on edge? And then you would answer, not at all sure. That's zero. Several days, one, over half the days. Two, nearly every day. Three. Number two is not being able to stop or control your worrying. Number three, worrying too much about different things. Number four, trouble relaxing. Number five, being so restless that it's hard to sit still. Number six, becoming easily annoyed or irritable. And number seven, feeling afraid as if something awful might happen. And what happens is the higher your score, the more severe your anxiety becomes. Basically, I think I don't have the numbers in front of me, but if I think it's something like 15 to 21, you have severe anxiety. So to keep that in mind, and based on your score, you could determine your level of anxiety and how much help you may or may not need. So how does anxiety affect you? You're feeling nervous, restless, or tense, having a sense of impending danger, panic, or doom. Like, oh my God, something bad is about to happen. I just know it. I know it. It's going to happen. I don't know where it's coming from, but it's going to come. Having increased heart rate. So if you're having heart palpitations or you're kind of just really getting amped up and you're not really finding out where that is, or even if you know where it is and your body's just reacting in a negative way, those are kind of things that could potentially lead to anxiety, or at least an indication of anxiety. Breathing rapidly, hyperventilation, sweating, trembling, uh, feeling weak or tired. I know some people who get very anxious, they just go to sleep, right? Go to sleep, and then hopefully you feel a little bit better, or you might not, you might disengage, or you might not feel yourself. You can't concentrate, trouble concentrating or thinking about anything other than the present worry, having trouble sleeping, digestive issues, having difficulty controlling your worry, and avoiding things that trigger your anxiety. So one of those key things is that with anxiety, like depression, other type of psychological symptoms or disorders, oftentimes there's like a somatic, they call it a somatic, psychosomatic element to it, right? So for some people, even if um, and even culturally, when you're talking about anxiety, some people may not experience anxiety the way westernized people kind of describe anxiety, but oftentimes people might experience it and like, oh, I have a headache, or I my stomach hurts, or I'm just not feeling well today, or whatever you may use as a way to express kind of feelings of discomfort and feelings of things might not go well. So oftentimes when that happens, those are indications of anxiety. And when those things consistently happen over and over and over, that's like your body responding almost in fight or flight mode. So it's like imagine your body constantly trying to fight, constantly worried, constantly hypervigilant. That starts to have a negative impact on you, not just emotionally, but also physically. It's like you're on hyperdrive all the time and you can't gear down. You can't gear down when you're trying to sleep. You can't gear down when you're awake. So if somebody tells you something, it's like, oh my God, it's the worst thing on earth because your body can't gear down. And that's what that stress and anxiety does to you. So what helps? Or at least we're going to go into talking about things that could potentially help you. Things that I can control versus things that I can't control. So when you're talking specifically about COVID-19, I took this directly online, but I thought it was very useful and it was better than anything that I put together. But at the same time, it was very succinct and it got to the point. So things that you can control: washing my hands, and practicing good hygiene, staying home, what you eat, the news that you consume, what you're hearing, like what you're hearing on a regular basis, your self-care, your thoughts and your actions, which we will go over, and reaching out for support to others. Those are things you can't control. You can talk to people. You could do a lot of different things to kind of maintain and keep control of yourself and of the situation that you're in. In the middle here is, oh, well, before we go to the middle, things I cannot control: the world situation and the spread of the virus, what other people do and don't do to take care of themselves, the government response, statistics and facts, laws and regulations. And I'm sure we could kind of name a million different things. And for other people, that when you put these two circles together, you're gonna have different things that you can control in your life, and there are different things in your life that you feel like you can't control. Oftentimes the anxiety comes when you think you could control the things that you can't control, or when you think that you can't control the things that you actually can control. And oftentimes what we would do in therapy is that we would actually begin to separate those things and start to think about, like, okay, this is what we can control, and why is it that you're thinking you can't, versus things you cannot control. Like, unfortunately, we can't control the government response. It'd be nice if we could just wish the government to do certain things, but that's not where we're at right now. So those are things that we can't control. So once you start to put those things in separate piles, then you could start to really take control of what can I do? What can I do to keep myself and my family in control? And we're talking about parents, right? We're talking about the fact that you are working, like you are taking care of your children, like most important thing in your life right now, one of the most important things in your life are your kids, and making sure that they're safe and they're feeling calm. And one example that I was going to use later, but I could use it now, is I remember somebody I remember traveling upstate one day on a train, and I remember that we were passing an area where all of a sudden it sounded like, a bunch of things were hitting the train, and just like, there's a lot of shaking and pinging, and I was just like, this is weird. So the first thing that I did was I looked at the conductor, and the conductor was nonchalant. It looked like he was looking like it was just another day on the train, no big deal. Big deal. And as a result of looking at the conductor, I said to myself, if the conductor is cool, then I'm cool. And if you think about that in your children's life, technically you're the conductor. right? I don't have to kind of go into major explanation, but you're the conductor. And oftentimes when things get a little crazy, oftentimes your kids are looking to you to see whether or not you things are in control and whether things are not in control. And yes, sometimes things are crazy. And yes, you will have a reaction. But if you are able to kind of say, you know what, we will be okay. Yes, this is a difficult time, but we'll get through this. That will help your children in the long run. And that will help them kind of manage their like, okay, mom and dad has this under control. Let me just listen to them instead of kind of freaking out and trying to figure out ways or figuring out ways to control things that they can't control. And in the middle here is knowing that I am doing everything I can and being at peace with that. So that's the ultimate goal. That's what we do in therapy. That's what you do in meditation. You can get that from talking with people. However, you're able to get that, when you're able to come to a sense of peace, in the sense that I am doing what I can do, is really important, right? It kind of gives you a sense of it's okay. Whatever happens, happens. I'm just doing the best that I can do. All right. So as we're talking about control, one of those things is that with anxiety, oftentimes we get a lot of thoughts, right? A lot of thinking, like, those thoughts become really just overwhelming and just really hard to get control of. So oftentimes the thoughts or what we think affects how so thoughts is what we think affects how we feel and act. So your thoughts, those things that are just running through your brain, you could be like, hey, uh, I'm never, I'm never gonna leave my house again because of COVID. And then as a result, your emotions are, hey, I feel really crappy. And as a result, your behavior, spelled in the British sense, uh, your behavior is such that, okay, I don't care, I don't want to talk to anybody, I'm feeling crappy, and it kind of creates the feedback loop. So the one thing that I want you to take into consideration is that your thoughts affects your emotions and your behaviors affects your thoughts and your emotions affects your thoughts and behavior. All of them affect each other, so it causes a feedback loop. So one of the things that I like to tell my clients, is that, listen, if you understand this and truly understand this concept, then now we could start to kind of disrupt those loops, or that those lines. We could kind of start saying, okay, if we're having a hard time controlling our thoughts, let's see if we could get control of our emotions. If we're having a hard time controlling our emotions and our thoughts, let's see if we could get control of our behaviors and start to purposefully shift the way we do certain things or the way we take care of ourselves. So that way you could hopefully shift your thoughts and your emotions and get better control of yourself. And this is just another example. For example, your thoughts are, I really let my kids down and they're angry at me, I'm not a good parent. Your emotions, I feel bad and guilty. And your behavior is, I'm going to withdraw from them. And it could be, I'm going to yell at them. Your behavior could be a lot of different things. And then what happens is that you continue to feed back into those thoughts, emotions, behaviors all around. So once you start to kind of affect those different parts of your thinking or your emotions or your behaviors, you could hopefully start making changes in the other aspects of the triangle. So one thing that I want to remind you is put your negative and unhelpful thoughts on trial. So whenever you are dealing with a lot of negative and unhelpful thoughts, put them on trial. Really think through them. I like to call it meta thinking, right? You're not just thinking about, oh, I'm just having a bad day, I'm horrible. Like, let's think about, what does that mean? I am having a bad day. What qualifies as a bad day? What happened during the day to make me feel as if it's a bad day? I've had bad days where I didn't really have a bad day. I just literally woke up on the wrong side of bed and I'm just not feeling 100% myself. Everything went as well as it would typically go, but because I'm in a bad mood, I classify it as a bad day. So then once I'm able to separate that, I realize, oh, maybe I didn't really have a bad day. You know what I mean? And then there are days where I've had some difficult things happen, but because I'm in such a good mood, I'm able to better manage those things. I'm like, it was a difficult day, but I'm fine. So when that happens and you're having negative, unhelpful thoughts, put them on trial. So for example, ask yourself, is this thought true? Where is the evidence? You know, does the logic for your thought hold up? Is there evidence or information countering that thought? Those things are really important because oftentimes we'll have a thought and the immediate thing is, this is true. You know, I'm never gonna be successful. So in your head, you're like, this is true. Like, I'm never gonna be successful. And then when you really start to break down those thoughts, you might say, well, what does it mean to be successful? You know, my family's happy. My children are happy. I'm feeling good about myself. I'm not worried about certain things. Yes, there are some things I would like to improve. So does that mean I'm not successful? What does that mean? And when you start to challenge those thoughts and really think through and parse them out, then you start to realize that those thoughts are coming. But then now you could start to reframe those thoughts. You could start to say, well, I'm not going to be successful. Maybe that's not true. I would like to be more successful, but I'm also happy with how things are going right now. This is what I can do to improve my career, or this is what I can do to improve my financial setting, or whatever else that may be of concern to you. So another example I could give you is this. Oftentimes, and this will be counted as like a cognitive distortion. So black and white thinking. Oftentimes, when you get anxious, what would happen is that you would start to kind of have an either or type of thinking style. It's either one thing or another. It's either you're wrong or you're right, right? There is no in between. And when that happens, it gets really tricky, right? It gets really tricky to kind of have a conversation about a problem. Like I think I remember one time I was telling my wife, he's like, you know, people could be wrong and right. And then she's like, yeah, absolutely. You're wrong and I'm right. And then I was like, okay, that was a whole different thing. But when you think about this, right, you need to start thinking about, well, where are the shades of gray? Are there shades of gray? Is are things as bad either on one end or on the other end? Um, am I being extreme or rigid? Sometimes in the moment when you're anxious, you could be thinking to yourself, "Oh my God, I'm freaking out. I This has to be this way. It has to be this way." And maybe in the back of your mind, you might be thinking to yourself, well, does it really have to be this way? It could be some other way. But what happens is that in the moment, because you're so anxious, the only thing that you feel would make you happy is if it goes in the way that you want it to go. And another thing is that, is there an in between where things are not perfect, but not a disaster, right? Sometimes, you know, especially when you're working with kids or you have children, sometimes you could tell your kids to do something a certain way, and then you do it another way, and it's not exactly the way you want it. But then now you have a choice of saying, well, this is not how I want it. You better fix it the way I want it. Or you could be kind of say, okay, well, I'm glad that you were able to do this. Um, Next time, can you please try to do it this way? And these are the reasons why I would like you to do it this way. You say there's different ways to kind of go about it, but when you're anxious, it's like, oh, I'm stuck, black, white thinking, this is how it has to be. And that's what kind of makes kind of difficult communications. You can't really talk through problems because it's either you're wrong or you're right. You're wrong. You're wrong. So anything you say might not be valid. Maybe the person is wrong, but certain points they say may be valid. And when you're able to stop and step away or start to think about, okay, I need to break away from this cognitive distortion. I need to break away from this black or white thinking for a moment. You could kind of start saying, like, okay, let's look at the shades of gray. Let's see if I could come to a compromise instead of falling back into kind of patterns that, you know, have not worked for you for one reason or another. Another example is jumping to conclusions. I like to call this fortune telling. I think sometimes in your life you feel like you could tell exactly what's going to happen before it happens. So if there's a situation that happens at work or with your children or at home with your relationships, you think you know what the conclusion is going to be. Oh, we're going to have another argument. It's going to be another horrible night, and you're jumping to conclusions. And as a result of jumping to those conclusions, now you fall into the pattern of, well, I'm in a bad mood already. And you're not even finding out what the situation is. So how do you challenge those things? How do I know this? How do you know this information? Do you have evidence that this is the problem? What are some alternative explanations for this? Maybe there might be something else that contributed to For example, a behavior that you may not like, or contributed to a comment that you heard that maybe it would bring up a lot of emotions, and maybe, and you are entitled to your emotions, but at the same time to kind of be calm and say, let's talk this through before I kind of go to that next level. And if and the next one is, if I were feeling differently, would I still think this? I think there are a lot of different ways to approach kind of combating or challenging your negative thinking. And when you're able to kind of really challenge your negative thinking, then you can better affect your emotions. And sometimes I've worked with people who have been able to really make good progress with challenging their thoughts, and they do a good job at it, but then their emotions are such that they continue to feel a certain way. And then once I start to realize, like, okay, this person is actually making a lot of effort and they're doing a good work, but if for whatever reason they're still feeling depressed or still feeling extremely anxious, now I could start looking into, okay, maybe we might need to start talking about medical intervention. Maybe we need to see a psychiatrist. Maybe we need extra help to kind of help you away from that emotional state that you seem to be stuck in. There might be different things that kind of put you in that negative state. And another thing is that your environment plays such an important role. If you have a chaotic environment, then things can lead to a chaotic situation. And sometimes we don't have control of that. That's the environment we have, is the environment we have. But at the same time, if you start to implement, okay, certain peaceful measures or peaceful activities into your environment, then you can start to shift your environment a little bit. Or if you're able to shift your environment altogether, then you find, oh, I'm a lot calmer. I'm a lot, relaxed. I'm able to think through things a little bit better. So kind of getting a change of scenery, things like that can help you kind of step away and start looking at your thoughts in a more clearer fashion. So things that I want to kind of, for families and to help parents with, and tips for dealing with family, especially during COVID-19, because there's a lot of things that come up. I think for some people, they're like, I don't want to, don't want to get anybody sick. I don't want to see parents. And then now your parents are like, well, or grandparents are like, I want to see the kids. I haven't seen them in like 25, no, that's exaggerating. I haven't seen them in 5 months. I need to see the kids, what's going on. And then now to really have an open conversation about your concerns. Oftentimes, because we get anxious, for example, how they might react. We get anxious about how situations might be, then we do not become open. We kind of close off. We don't answer phone calls, or we don't kind of, or we answer the phone call and we immediately get an attitude, and it starts into an argument, and all these different things that we don't need. Oftentimes we have to be able to say, hey, I need to share my concerns. I am scared because of X. I do not like this because of this. And be forthright, be truthful as much as possible, or be truthful. That's usually the best thing to help, because when you're able to do that, now you could kind of let people know what's going on with you, and then other people could respond to you by hopefully being truthful as well. But then now you can have a better understanding of how they're responding to you. If you're being truthful and forthright, and people are being extremely unresponsive and anxious and angry, then now you could have a better idea of where this person is at, and then now you can make decisions based on what the situation is. Make your boundaries clear. Sometimes you have your families and you have your grandparents, and depending on your cultural dynamic, there are a lot of different factors that play into your decisions about family and everything else. But it's really good to have certain levels of boundaries and put them in place, and to make those boundaries clear. It just helps in the long run. It helps your sanity. It helps not for you not to feel resentful or feel as if you're stuck between a rock and a hard place. Make solutions with family members. That's a big with. I think sometimes when people get very anxious or very scared, you kind of tell people, this is what we're gonna do, right? And then for some people, they're okay with that. Okay, this is what we're gonna do. For other people, they're not okay with that. And if you guys have some teenagers, especially some pretty oppositional teenagers, or you have some people in your life that you care about but don't seem to respond to that, oftentimes you find yourself in situations where you're like telling them what to do, and then they're like, we're not doing this. And then now you kind of find yourself in a power struggle. But when you kind of go into, okay, I'm going to work with, I need to find a solution with you. These are my boundaries. This is where I could potentially give in them, but this is where I need from you. So when you're being clear, when you're being forthright, when you're setting goals, you're setting boundaries, and you're making plans with, even with your teenagers. And I know some people might be like, oh, those are my teenagers. They're my kids. They have to do this. Sometimes, yeah, that's the case. But if you're trying to help them develop into like independent thinkers and people who really, it's good to kind of start helping them to make decisions with them, to kind of give them that little bit of rope, not too much but just enough to kind of let them know that you care and that you care about what they have to say. And for example, in terms of COVID-19, talk about getting tested. It's important that people get tested. If you decide that you want to meet with family, or you want to do a small gathering, whatever, let people know, hey, I want to do this. Everybody please get tested before you come over. Some people will grumble, but at least if you make your boundaries clear, then you can move forward with whatever plans you might have. And then breathe. Like, this is not an easy time. This is unprecedented. Plans have been stopped. Vacations have been stopped. I've been trying to go to Mexico and in the Caribbean for months now, and every couple months I'm thinking that it could happen, and it doesn't happen. And I just need to breathe and know that at one point or another, I will be able to take my vacation with my family, because Lord knows I need it. Right? Tips for dealing with daycares and schools. Have an open conversation about your concern with teachers and administration. Be forthright. Again, I talk about open communication, because oftentimes communication can be a scary thing, because communication sometimes involves a little bit of vulnerability. You got to be able to say, I am not happy with this, or I am happy with this, or I would like to see this. Now, will that person respond back to you the same way that you would like? Maybe not. But then when you start to have an open conversation, hopefully now information can be shared, and then now you can make better decisions for yourself. So for example, I know a lot of parents were really concerned about, and anxious about whether to send their kids back to school, whether to keep them home. But then for some parents, once they talk with their administration, they're like, you know what, I'm not really happy with what they're trying to give me. They don't really have a plan. The people seem a little bit wishy-washy. My kid is staying home until further notice. While other people who are like, oh, my administration or my teachers, they know what they're doing. Like, they're militant in regards to kind of making sure people stay safe and following rules and procedures and shutting down the school when, if there's a case. And in that case, might say, you know what, I might be a little bit more comfortable with sending my child, because at least now I know that there are people who are actually taking the measures and things seriously. And it's not just COVID-19; it's life in general. Like, if you're bringing your kids out or you're dealing with things in general, you to be able to have open conversations so you can make better decisions is really important. And it helps with your anxiety, and it helps with your thinking, and you don't kind of go into ambiguity, which leads to kind of more negative thinking. Read the safety plans in schools, daycares regarding COVID, ask questions, gather information, and breathe again. Please breathe again. Calm down, calm your thinking, take care of yourself, please. So I keep saying breathe and all that other stuff, because self-care is important. And I think some people forget that, because when you're taking care of your family, you're on a grind. You're thinking to yourself, I got to get up. I got to work every day. I got to do this. I got to make sure everybody's taken care of. I got to make sure Timmy's piano lessons is paid for. I got to make sure that, they got something to eat. And all those things are really important, but your family also needs you. So it's important to try to care for your physical and mental health. Take care of yourself, which means, take an extra long bath, go for walks, find ways to kind of get some alone time with people that you want alone time with, or do things that you really care about. If there's a hobby that you love, do that hobby. Don't get caught up in like, I don't have time. I don't have time. Do those things that make you happy, because then that refills your cup. That refills your bucket, your cup, whatever example you want to use, so that way you can be there for your family. You can care for them. You are not perfect, and there is no perfect decision. So you have to do what's best based on the situation, based on precautions, based on everything that you have. You're not going to always get it right, but you can do the best you can. And I think what happens is that people have it in their mind. Again, these are another cognitive distortions and irrational beliefs where it's like, oh, I need to be perfect. I have to get this perfect. And then if that's the case, then now you need to take that thought, hold it in front of you, and look at it and say, why do I need these things to be perfect? What does that do for me? And is that even possible? What does a perfect solution look like? And if those and once you start to really question those, then you start to realize, well, maybe I can't get perfect, but I could be happy with just good enough right now. I could be happy with this conclusion, or I could be happy with that conclusion, which kind of ultimately lowers your anxiety. Taking care of your child, your young child has his joys and struggles. Make time for yourself. I have a young baby. She's about, well, not about, she's a little bit over 1 years old, and I love her to death, but homegirl could drive me a little bit nuts sometimes. Like, it could be a little bit crazy. Like, she'll wake up at 5:30 in the morning every day, regardless of what time I put her to sleep. And then I have to be up and I have to be there and I will have to take care of her. And she needs this and she needs that. And that's part of having a daughter. And I love it. But at the same time, I'll sometimes turn to my wife and I'll be like, I need you to take the baby. I can't today. And she'll be like, I know you've been doing it. It's my turn. So those are the things to kind of help you through that period. It's okay to struggle. You can't be super dad. You can't be super mom all the time. And sometimes you need to save that superness for when it really counts. You know what I mean? Self-care, limit access to news, maintain structure, have a routine. Super important. If you're stuck at home all day, every day, have a routine. Wake up early, do what you have to do during the day, even if it sucks, even if things don't go out. Have a routine. I'm the type of person, I tend to be kind of very like nonchalant and free willing. So oftentimes I'm like, I don't need a routine, but I've noticed during COVID-19, I need a routine. Like I live by it, and I'm thankful that even though I'm complaining about my daughter waking up at 5:30 in the morning, that 5:30 in the morning has forced me to wake up at 5:30 in the morning. And this is coming from somebody who was like an adamant I'm not a morning person until now. Like now I'm like, oh, I'm even on days where I don't have to wake up at 5:30, I'm up at 5:30. So now I'm like, oh, this is great. Not really, but great enough for me for that. So once I have my routine, I'm able to kind of say, all right, this is what I'm doing for the day. This is where I'm at. This is where my next steps are. And those kind of gives me that structure and kind of keeps me sane. And especially for young children. Children need routine. Like, they may act as if they don't want it, but trust me, they need routine. And when you put those routines in place, it helps keeps things structured. They know, okay, I don't want to, but I have to go to school. Oh, I don't want to, but I have to eat lunch now. Oh, I could watch TV and do these things or screen time, or at least, but I know that there's an end to it. Socialize on Zoom, call your friends, work out, find a problem that you can solve. I know for me personally, there are some people who like to solve the big problems first, which is fine. You could do that, and that's great for you. For me, I'm the type of person, if I have a lot of things to do, I like to solve all the little problems first. Because what happens is that my brain, the way my brain works, is that I start thinking about all the little problems that I haven't done yet, especially if I'm trying to solve a big problem. So if I solve all the little problems first, then now I could focus my energy on the big problem, because once I knock out the big problem, I know all the little problems are pretty much done. So you could prioritize based on what makes sense for you. There are some people who say, no, that doesn't make sense, Dr. Sam. You got to solve the big problem and then you can knock out the little problems. And if that's what you want to do, go for it. I'm not going to stop you. But I think to each their own. And if you find something that works for you, use it. And then find ways to kind of build success. Because for me, when I solve those little problems, it makes me happy because I know, okay, one thing down. Okay, two things down. Okay, three things down. And that builds success in me. And that kind of lowers my anxiety so I could focus on the big problem ahead of me. So one of the last things that I want to share with you is a quote. I forgot from the psychologist, I think Jessica Bolte or something. I can't remember exactly. But the thing, but I love her quote. Please take responsibility for the energy you bring into this space. You are responsible for the, and when I say space, it could be any space. It could be the space in your home, at your job. It could be this the metaphorical space between you and your kids, or you and and your relationships, or whatever. Those spaces, you have to be responsible for the energy you bring in. If you bring in negative to energy, typically you'll get negative energy back. Now, does that always mean you'll get positive energy if you bring positive energy? Does that always mean that you have to be positive in every space? No. In every situation, absolutely not. But what it means is that you need to start taking responsibility. Is how am I coming into this situation? If I'm coming in with a black and white thinking, if I'm coming in with a conclusion to a problem that hasn't even been discussed yet, then guess what happens? You typically get a bad situation happening, either a bad argument or a bad problem or something that blows up out of proportion. But when you're responsible for that energy, when you give yourself time, space, when you calm yourself in such a way to make things better for yourself, it usually, typically, doesn't always, but usually you could get to a better place emotionally. And but always seek out more help when you need it. You are not alone. You're not a bad parent, and we will get through this. This is my information for Small Brooklyn, and get a therapist. It's just for you. It doesn't necessarily need to be myself or any, but at the same time, get a therapist, because oftentimes there's a lot of stress, especially nowadays. And when you're able to find somebody that you're able to really be vulnerable with and help, and then let them help you, that's one of the best things you can do. I could attest to that. It's amazing. So I think that's it from me. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask, and hopefully, uh, thank you.
Awesome, Sam. Thanks so
All right,
much.
no problem.
So yeah, people have been putting in questions in the chat box, so I
Okay.
have some good questions for you. So first of all, actually, multiple people have talked about feeling overwhelmed by their anxiety. They ruminate and ruminate, or like amp themselves up to a place where then they're feeling panicky and overwhelmed,
Mm.
and probably at that point have a hard time taking the steps back that you were just talking about. What would you say to those people? How do they help themselves once they're in that place of overwhelm? How do they keep themselves from getting there in the first place?
So that's tricky, right? Because when you get into that space, it feels like you don't have control. And especially when you have anxiety that's so out of control, it's like, well, like there's nothing I can do to calm myself down. Oftentimes, the first thing to do is you need to take a step back. Like you need to force yourself to step away from the situation, and maybe not in the sense of like walking outside from your family home or whatever, but kind of maybe even a mental step back to kind of really get composure of yourself and do things that helps you get better composure of yourself. So for some people, I go back to like prayer. Like some people love to pray, and if prayer helps, pray, right? If if there's a friend that you can talk to, go call that friend. If there are things that you do that for a fact help you calm down, do those things. Because what happens is that you're getting overwhelmed in that situation and you're getting stuck, which means you're stuck. Okay, it's like you're a car in the middle of a rainstorm and you can't drive out, so you're stuck. So in that situation, some people think, oh well, I need to press gas, like I need to, and then you keep pressing gas, your gas is going down, your car, I don't know people who are better at cars, like my father would yell like, oh, you should know cars by now. Like people who are better at understanding vehicles, you're probably going to blow out your engine the more you keep trying to press the gas on it. So what do you have to do? You actually have to take your foot off the gas. And that's like a forceful thing, because in your mind, you might be panicking. I need to get out of here. I need this. I need to escape.
Yeah.
What you need to do is pull yourself away, right? Find a way to pull yourself out. And that's the tricky part. That's where you need to kind of either learn meditation, learn how learn how to communicate with the people who you know could help pull you out of those kind of really stuck zones, or if there are things that you know help you. And I think, and there's a tricky thing, because some people will do things that are withdrawal, like they withdraw from situations,
Right.
and they think that, like, oh, I'm just taking care of myself. No, you're withdrawing, right? You have to be aware. There's taking care of yourself and there's withdrawing. You might withdraw because it makes you feel good, like, oh, I'm not worrying about this anymore because I'm playing video games, or I'm, doing other things that, I'm watching YouTube videos or whatever that you do to care for yourself. But if you're gonna do some of those things, you have to know, I'm not withdrawing. I am creating space and really finding a space for myself to kind of really think about what's happening and start to break down the problem little by little. What is the issue?
That's great.
What
That's
is,
a great distinction.
yeah,
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, I really like that idea of knowing the difference between withdrawing and avoiding the thing that is making you anxious, which
mhm,
really just increases the anxiety over time, right? It
yeah,
keeps you from doing those things that you need or want to do, versus taking space for yourself and giving yourself a break so that you can regroup and come back to it again, right?
exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
that's awesome. And sometimes that being able to take space for yourself and step back needs to start with something as simple as what you said before, which is just breathing, right?
Hmm.
Take those breaths. And sometimes that's all, you can be so overwhelmed that that's all you can do in the moment. But that little action in that space, especially when you do it mindfully and purposefully, can actually give you a little bit of room to then get some of your thinking brain back online.
Exactly.
So I love that.
There's
Yeah.
something to be said. Like there's a saying that people might use in a positive way or a negative way. Fake it till you make it, right? Because we
Yeah.
talked
Right.
about thoughts, but even with behaviors, sometimes we have to fake it till we make it. Sometimes in your brain, you're like, I don't want to deal with this. I don't want to deal with this. I want to leave.
Yeah.
But that's where you have to make the actual decision of, I am not leaving. I am going to sit through this. I am going to force myself to think through this. I'm going to get a
Hmm.
piece of paper and write this down, because I
Hmm.
because what happens is that now you're kind of shifting your behavior.
Right.
You're shifting the behavior. And remember what I said in the cognitive triangle, your behavior has effect on your thoughts and your emotions. Same way
Right.
your thoughts have an effect on your behavior and your emotions have a behavior, your thoughts, and blah, blah, blah. You get the whole story. But the
Right.
idea is, there are times where you could use your behavior. Like, think about it. Have you ever done something brave where you were scared out of your mind, and yet you made that second step forward, regardless of what your brain and your body and your emotions are telling me? And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, that's amazing. This was the best experience of my life.
Yeah, it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be.
It wasn't as bad because you
Right.
purposefully, that behavior in that moment, there was a part of you that was like, I need to make this step forward.
Yeah.
And that's that shift in the
Yeah.
behavior that affected your thoughts and your emotions.
Right. Like you were saying before about the jumping to conclusions, I think a lot of people end up with an anticipatory anxiety about something that's going to be bad, whether it's actually making them anxious in the moment. They think that it's going to be anxiety producing. They have this dread about how difficult something is going to be. And it's more that they're anxious about the heaviness and the stress of the feelings that they're going to feel, even if the physicality and the reality of the world is not so bad. And so taking that second step, like you said, kind of forcing yourself to do that and to stay in that situation, even when you're feeling anxious and you're dreading something, is building that muscle for being able to just tolerate that anxiety and that dread a little bit more until you can get to the other side and realize, oh God, it was not even nearly as bad as I thought it was going to be.
Yeah. And
So it's really powerful.
yeah, and of course there's nuances, and I
Of
think people
course.
can come up with a lot of different scenarios where staying may not be beneficial, or may not, and then absolutely, like, those things are correct.
Totally.
Like I'm not gonna argue with you. Those things, there's certain situations you should not stay. You should go, right?
Yeah.
But like,
Right.
for example, it's funny. I've been watching the Michael Jordan Last Dance. I think a lot. I know some people might not care at all, but there's something apparently Michael Jordan said. He's like, why should something that Michael Jordan or people were saying about him is that he had the ability to always be present, where everybody else was worried about the future, the past, all these different things. He was always present. And then he said, why am I going to worry about a shot I haven't taken yet?
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a lot of good advice, right, that we give to a lot of clients coming in, because there's so much of anxiety is future focused. And
Yeah.
so the more that you can build that skill of staying present in the moment, yeah, the best is that you can. I love that. I'm gonna have to watch Last Dance, clearly.
Oh, it's amazing. I'm addicted. You know, I'm watching it with my daughter.
Oh,
She doesn't understand anything. She
no, of
just
course.
screams. But
But she's soaking it in. She's soaking it in.
she's
Yeah, that's
soaking
great.
in it. I'm hoping she does.
So, and then what do you say to people who are maybe starting the process of getting overwhelmed? So, like, they haven't gotten to the panicky place where they need to take the step back yet, but they're starting to get there. You know, we all have that cycle of ruminating thoughts. Like, I want to go to Thanksgiving. My mom really wants me to be there. I'm scared about COVID. I'm scared about this stuffy nose that I have, this scratchy throat. It's going to lead to a lifelong disorder. You know, you're starting to feel that build of
Mhm.
the cyclical thoughts. So what do you say to somebody who's just on that ramp and they can recognize it in themselves?
Yeah. So it's difficult, right? Like the thing is that when I say those things are common, like unfortunately, I can't say anything that could magically make you stop. You know what I mean? And I think that's what some
Right.
people kind of get in their brain. Like, I just need to make it stop. I just need to make it stop. Like, it has to stop. And then they're freaking out. Like, and if you can't make it stop, I'm gonna find somebody else that can make it stop. You know? But
Therapy doesn't work.
it doesn't work. Therapy hates like all hell's broken. You know what I mean? But the thing is that when you're having those ruminating thoughts, the first thing is, and when you're actually feeling that buildup, you have to force yourself to stop. Like, there are times when I'm like panicking about something, and then I'm panicking and I'm moving and I'm freaking out and I'm moving around. I'm looking for my keys and I can't find it. And then I literally stop and I'm like, what is wrong with me? I actually do a body check. I kind of think, okay, is my brain okay? I don't have a headache. I have a big head, pretty heavy, but fine all the time. As well, is my stomach okay? Is my bladder okay? Is my leg like? And then I realize, oh, it's my bladder. You know what I mean? Then I gotta go. You know, I gotta take care of that. And think about, you have needs that need to be taken care of. So if you're getting to that overwhelmed space, oftentimes when I say to stop, you have to find ways to kind of really stop and say, what am I worried about? If I'm worried about Thanksgiving, right? What about Thanksgiving is concerning? Then you would talk with your family. Hey, I'm worried about Thanksgiving. Who's going to be there? Is everybody getting tested? No? Okay. Mom, I love you dearly. I don't know if I, no, not, that's up to you. I'm giving you a scenario. I'm not giving you the scenario. I'm giving you a scenario. I may not be able to come. I will come to see you early in the morning with the children, and then I'm going home. You see what I mean? Because I know Grandpa or Uncle Bobby or whoever, they're not going to test, and they're walking around without masks and stuff like that. And I can't. Sorry. And Mom might be unhappy, but those are the boundaries you're set. And you also kind of say, would that be okay with you? I know you would like me to stay, but I think this would be beneficial. Like, let's talk about where, like, you know, and then you start to make that plan. But once you start to figure out what's causing that overwhelming thought, what's causing you to cycle, and think of the worst case scenario. And then the worst case scenario is, I'm going to go to Thanksgiving, then I'm going to catch COVID, then I'm going to be in the hospital, then who's going to take care of my children, and who's going to do this, and who's going to do that? Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God.
Right. And by taking that step back and recognizing what's driving it, it also gives you the space to problem solve in that way too, to say, okay, I can't be there for the main dinner when all these older people are walking around with no masks on, but I can go and see my mom in the morning before everybody else shows up. And that's a compromise, right? A way of solving the problem in a creative way that a lot of times we can't do when our emotions are flooding and anxiety is flooding our brains. So yeah, that's awesome.
And then, yeah, and then thing is,
Um,
it causes resentment and other feelings as well over time. So be like, you're not only kind of creating space for your, like you're creating space for yourself, but you're also preventing future anxieties as well. Because then now if you
Mhm.
decide, well, I'm not gonna go, screw everybody, then now, now you have problems from day on. But when you kind of work on like, okay, like this is what's happening, mom, like this is what I need, this is a boundary, can we make this work? And maybe hopefully you have a family member who's willing to say, hey, I know it's not what I want, but I think we could do this. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And then now it could work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, even in that vein, we're all, I think we are often trying to meet all the expectations of ourselves, um, do everything that we would normally do, hold ourselves to the high standards that we try to. Many Brooklyn parents are overachievers.
Yeah.
So how do we kind of give ourselves the space to maybe not be the best overachiever selves that we would normally be? Because a lot of us have anxiety about that too, about not meeting those standards.
Um, it's the challenging those thoughts. I think a lot of that is challenging those thoughts that are. I think what happens is that when you are, when you're in that space where you're trying to kind of either overachieve and you're like, I need to be perfect or I need to be the best parent. What I like to tell parents is like, there are studies out there that says, how much like, how good of a parent do you need to be, or how often do you need to get things right in order to be a great parent? And they said, is it 90%? Is it 70%? There's like, no, it actually is like 30%. You need, and I was like, that's a pretty low bar. It was like, to get it right. So I'm
I
sure
can
there's a
reach
lot of people,
30%.
it was like a 40, they're 50, they're 60. But when you're thinking about, it's not necessarily about getting everything right.
Yeah.
It's about making the repairs that you need to make. Because sometimes you're not going to like your kid is going to come to you, they're going to be upset. You're not going to get it. Right? But
Right.
then you're like, I don't get it. You're pissing me off. I'm anxious. You don't see I'm working. I'm working to pay for your school. Get out of here. And then you're freaking out. And the
I'm gonna
actuality
be
is,
the
yeah, but
perfect
you want to be
parent.
you could, like, even if you have that moment, which we all do, instead of beating yourself up and say, hey, going back and have a conversation. I'm sorry. I didn't listen to you. And I know that you're anxious too, and I'm anxious as well. But now I'm calm, and I'm talking to you to let you know that I'm sorry that this happened. Let's talk about what you need, you know. And then when you're able to start doing those things, right, and you kind of get away from, oh, I need to be the perfect parent. If I'm not the perfect parent, that means I'm a horrible parent. And if I'm a horrible parent, that means my kids will never go to college or Harvard or UCLA or Pace or something. And then you're like, and then they're gonna live on my couch for the rest of my life. And
So there's that black and white thinking again,
it's the
right?
black and white thinking, like there's another one we didn't go over, this catastrophizing. And those things,
Yeah.
unfortunately, those things may not, like, you're saying this about your kid, and then your kid is like well adjusted, going to school. They're like, I can't wait to go to college so I can get away from home. And then you're like, you're gonna stick here. And like, being able to adjust your expectations, being able to say, you know
Mm.
what, listen, I want my child to be happy. Right?
Yeah. And sometimes it's just prioritizing that, right? It's again that taking the step back,
Yeah,
uh, realizing what's really going on there, and then prioritizing what's actually important.
exactly.
Um, yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So we're nearing the end here. We're already a couple of minutes over, but since many of the people here are parents, a lot of them wanted to know about managing anxiety in their kids, and so we will have a webinar about that in the future that's more kid focused. But what do you think, Sam? Are these things that you're talking about? Are they things that apply to kids as well, kids and teenagers?
Absolutely, 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 absolutely. I think with kids too, like, I had a conversation recently where I think one thing a parent was noticing was like, oh, like my child has anxiety or they're having frustration. But the truth of the matter was it didn't look like it, right? They became oppositional. They started doing things that you're like, this is not typical of, Johnny or Bob or, whatever, or Apple. This is not typical of my child, right? And then they're like, well, why are they acting this way? And it doesn't look like traditional anxiety, because oftentimes those like children there are some children who are very expressive. They could be like, I'm scared, and they're able to tell what's going on. But some children, they're not fully aware of what's going on with them, and they have a hard time expressing those emotions. So then when they have that hard time, it's like, okay, your job is to one, help them to calm down, help them to begin to talk through and process what is happening. And then to also, like I said, the train conductor example, oftentimes, like we model for our kids, and that could be said as like, for example, now that I'm a dad, I'm starting to notice the dad things that my dad did. So I'm like, oh my God, that's exactly what my dad would have said. Oh my, like I sound exactly like my dad.
Yeah.
Like I looked in the mirror and I was like,
For better or for worse.
for better or for worse, I see the front, and I was like, oh my God, Pop. And I was like, wait, it's me. It's just sad. And then I realized that, and so what's happening is that I am looking at the behaviors that he did, and I am saying, oh, these are the behaviors that he did. And now I'm
Sure.
potentially going to use that with my children, but I'm also aware because there are certain things that that my dad did that I don't want to do with my kids, or there's certain relationships things that happen in my life that I don't want for my kids. So being fully aware of those things, while I could take the amazing things that my father and my parents did for me as a child, and I'm going to transfer that, hopefully, that to my daughter. But there's certain things that I'm going to be like, I'm going to keep that over there because I'm there. And I think those are the
Yeah.
things that we need to do, in the sense that if your child is having anxiety, okay, maybe my parents would have never noticed that. And they would have been
Got
like,
it.
don't have anxiety. They're from
Mm,
the Caribbean. Kids don't get anxious. What do you have to get
sure.
anxious for? You have food on your plate, you have clothes on your back, you have your video games, you have nothing to be anxious about. You know what I mean? Well, I know from my future is kids do get anxious. They do get scared. And when they are able to talk to somebody, just same way you're able to talk to somebody, when they're able to communicate their feelings, when they're able to be vulnerable and not feel as if they're being shut out or shut down, those are things that could help them manage their anxiety. And if you notice that things get to a point that despite how much you're doing, you're continuing to behave that way, then you could say, all right, I think I need more help. I think I need
Certainly.
more help. I need to talk to my
Yeah.
pediatrician. I need to talk to a psychologist. I need to talk to some people because I'm doing the best I can, but for whatever reason, my child is continuing to have this anxiety, and I want to find ways to better help them. You know what I mean? When
Absolutely.
you're present and you're there, those things have a significant effect.
Totally.
Trust me, even with kids,
Yeah.
I talk a lot. Even with kids who have a hard time in their lives, I've noticed those kids who have a better prognosis and do better are always with the parents who are present. Always.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Oh,
Present, listening, not dismissive,
yeah.
and and can help kids to learn to monitor their own thoughts and behaviors. It's something that really develops over time, and it's certainly not instinctual yet. A lot of times it takes until the people in their 20s to be able to really reflect on how you're thinking
Yeah.
in any sort of instinctual way, but they can learn it, and they can learn it easier. And that is something that we can do for our kids too, to recognize the thoughts and the emotions behind behaviors, and to be present for them, like you said. So all of the things that Sam has talked about in terms of ways for us to help manage our own anxiety, shifting perspective, combating unhelpful thoughts, taking space away from the emotion to try and get back to logical thinking. All of those things are things that kids can learn too. And so we and other mental health providers can absolutely help give you some ideas on how to do that and support you as you help your kids. So we are over time, so I'm going to end here, even though there are definitely a few more questions here. So if anybody does have questions that you feel like you haven't been answered, please feel free to reach out to us. Our website is smallbrooklyn.com. You can reach out to Sam directly at sam@smallbrooklyn.com or me, Mandy, at smallbrooklyn.com. Feel free to send something through our website. But we're happy to answer questions. We're happy to connect you to one of our clinicians, but also to anybody else that we have a very large network of providers of all kinds of stripes in our network, and we'll help find the right person for you, whether it's another psychologist or therapist, whether it's an occupational therapist or a speech therapist or a pediatrician like Premier Pediatrics. So thanks again for coming to this webinar. And all of the slides and a link to this recording will be made available for everybody who registered. So thanks so much and have a great night.
Bye, everybody.